Wow, an act to follow. So I'm going to ask you a little bit. We're going to be touching on all of the topics discussed this morning, but first I'm going to ask you to introduce a little bit about your portfolios and what sectors make you most excited at the moment.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Elena. I'm one of the partners at Northzone. Northzone is a global VC fund which invests in founders from seed stage all the way to growth. And we're global, so we have offices across Europe and also in the US. My focus in particular is supporting founders in their growth journey, be it from talent, business development, learning and community, across all the different stages.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maren Bannon. I'm one of the co-founders of January Ventures. We're a pre-seed focused firm. I'm based here in London. We have about 65 portfolio companies across the US and Europe. We invest across both areas. And yeah, we do checks of 250 to 500K into startups that are just starting out.
So as Kieran just touched on, there's a lot of talk and a lot of hype going on about European startups in particular and whether or not they're able to reach that unicorn status, or even those kind of later stages of growth that we're seeing is just replete in the US market. A pretty strongly asserted hypothesis about 20 minutes ago was that this is down to the mindset of founders and the mindset of the tech sector in general. You know, the US is a very, very different place to Europe. I would ask if you would agree. Do you think that that mindset is the only factor at stake, or do you think that there are other barriers to scaling that founders in Europe face?
So at Northzone, we're actually quite optimistic about the future of Europe and the talent that's coming out. So we've seen, we've been around for more than 30 years, so we've been lucky enough to see some of the early scale-up companies come across and become of size and become really global. And I think these companies are now sort of breeding the next generation of amazing founders here in Europe, and it's a really exciting phase to see that ecosystem grow. So yeah, I mean, mindset, I think that's changing. And also there's a lot of learnings, I think, that we can get from the US, be it storytelling, a lot of optimism, and really going for the big outcomes that we can definitely learn from.
Absolutely. Maren, what do you think?
Yeah, I do think Europe has a bit of a marketing challenge right now. It feels like I'm really bullish on the UK and Europe. I think there's so much opportunity. There's really strong technical talent, a lot of interesting things coming out of universities. There's a lot of reasons I think this ecosystem is incredible, but I think there's something about the narrative that I think needs to shift so that it can just be portrayed in a much more positive way, especially to the US, because I think when people just hear kind of these like negative stories, I think it really does a disservice to an ecosystem that is really strong. The other shift that I've noticed in the past 3 or 4 years is before COVID, it felt like there was this pressure to, as you scale, move your headquarters to the US, and I've seen post-COVID that really changing, at least in our portfolio. I've seen a lot of companies that they keep their headquarters in Europe and they'll just build out sales and marketing teams in the US, and I think that's really positive for the ecosystem here. But I do think maybe it's coming together as an ecosystem and trying to come up with really like the reasons why this is a great ecosystem and trying to have more of that narrative that we can all share. And I think Project Europe is a great start to having something that feels exciting.
Well, let's dig into that. Maybe we can redefine that narrative right here, right now. When you're acting in a kind of advisory capacity and founders are bringing to you the challenges that they're facing while scaling, what are the kind of things that they say?
Yeah, I mean, talent is a huge one. I think early stage, there's a lot of sort of how do I build my team with scrappy generalists that can help get to the next level. And if it's a technical co-founding team, then that often includes finding a commercial co-founder, or it could just be scaling your engineering talent team. But then as you scale, I think that's where talent can become a bit of a blocker. So there aren't that many companies in Europe that have gone to the IPO journey. So I think that's the stage where often founders feel like they need to go outside of Europe to hunt that next level of operator. I don't think necessarily that's a bad thing, and I think that's changing, but there is, as you said before, Maren, I think there is, more of sort of a hybrid structure where you can attract some of these great operators and either bring them to Europe or have a go-to-market hub in the US without having to shift your full team and culture to grow in the US.
Mm-hmm. Maren, what do you think?
Yeah, and since I'm investing at pre-seed stage, a lot of the challenges that I see from founders are just finding those first customers, really the go-to-market, and then fundraising for the next round. And I think on the customer front, we're usually investing in businesses that have a really global mindset from the start, and so they can sell to the US even at the early stage, and we can help a lot with introductions to customers from the beginning. I find one of the challenges here is if companies want to kind of go market by market in Europe, that can be a slow process. And so I do think it is a positive thing when they want to go sell to the US at the early stage. I don't think that's bad for this ecosystem as long as they're like keeping their roots here. I think it's still a really positive thing. And then for fundraising, we help a lot with fundraising and finding, really figuring out like what are the metrics you need to hit for the next round, who are the best investors. I do find in Europe there's a bit of like a thinner capital stack. Like there's a certain kind of persona of investor that is really typical here, and if you're a startup that maybe is a little outside the box, I find can be a lot harder to find the right investor, whereas in the US there's just so many more funds that usually they can like find the right fit for them. So that can sometimes be a challenge, and sometimes it's flipping to Delaware if they have US customers and then raising from the US where there just might be a broader range of types of investors.
That's really interesting. If I could kind of tease that out a little bit more, what is it, do you think, that maybe investors or this specific type of investor that you mentioned is particularly skeptical of? What turns them off?
I just meant like in Europe, it's very B2B SaaS focused. So if you're a B2B SaaS company, then there's just tons of investors here for you. But if you're a consumer or you're doing something, I don't know, a little bit different, then it can be a lot harder, I think. Or even something like deep tech, or health tech. When I go through and try to figure out like the list of investors that those companies could go to for the next round, it's often like a much shorter list.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's something that Kieran was certainly talking about, how they're planning to invest in this next generation of entrepreneurs who are really going to transform industries, and it seems that that's something that Europe is crying out for. It seems that a real barrier to that kind of thing is this idea of resilience. People speak about B2B SaaS as this, if it's a very resilient, adaptable kind of product. How do you advise founders, or how do you anticipate within your firms disruptions to markets that might make a certain investment feel slightly more volatile? How do you bolster resilience within those companies that maybe are more transformative or more out there, outside of the box?
Yeah, I think, often those are the most exciting companies, but they may just not have as straightforward a fundraising journey as something that's like a very kind of vertical B2B SaaS type of thing. I think a lot of it is knowing that what's hot in the moment for VCs, it changes every year or two, right? We've gone through so many cycles. Right now it's AI, but we've had crypto, we've had Web3, we've had I can list all the different things over the past few years. So probably in your startup journey as a founder, you're going to have times when you're in the hot market and then times when you're not in the hot market. And I think it's just having that resilience to kind of keep going through those, build your company in a way that you can get through the ups and downs, meaning if you raise a big round, don't just burn all that capital, make sure that you can, have the runway, have the time to pivot, have the time to iterate. A lot of it is storytelling though too, because I think often with good storytelling, you can fit into the narrative of the moment.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And, for example, a theme that we're spending a lot of time on is sort of using AI within the vertical SaaS space. So that's sort of, picking industries that are ripe for disruption and finding, applications of AI that can be really tailored and really create efficiencies and accelerate those specific sectors. So there is a lot of potential there to reframe and iterate some of the existing innovation that's out there to become much more sort of resilient according to the various market cycles.
And in which sectors do you think that these applications are maybe most scalable? Do you have any examples that are particularly exciting to you?
Yeah, I mean, from our portfolio, there's a lot of exciting companies that we've recently backed. I mean, one is in the space of clinician scribing, which I think in the US you have a number of players, but in Europe, having a leader there is sort of a really exciting proposition. It does mean that you need to scale, as you were saying before, market by market, and there's all the intricacies there. But it's a really great use of technology where you can create real impact and really disrupt how that sector operates. Another investment that we're quite excited about in the US that my colleagues did there is in a maybe less sexy space of government procurement, which is traditionally quite slow. It involves filling in tons of forms, and there it's sort of a tool that really enables smaller companies as well to be able to participate in these tenders. So I love these types of examples because they're really reinventing and creating momentum in sort of more traditional and slower industries that you don't typically see front of line.
And Maren, where do you see these kind of these technologies going from beyond B2B SaaS? Which are the most scalable technologies in other industries that maybe you think could surge past Series A or past pre-seed?
Yeah, so we also really like these sort of boring, unsexy industries. I think there's so much opportunity. They may not be the flashiest things to talk about at a conference, but I think we've seen some of those businesses just have really strong growth. So excited about that. We're a bit cautious about AI. It feels pretty bubblish right now. Every startup pitch I see is AI for something. So we've done a bit in AI, but we're really looking at is there customer pull for the product that they're selling, and less focused on what the buzzy AI does, but more kind of just trying to continue focused on the basics of, is there customer pull, is there a need for what the company is creating. And then an area that we have continually looked at over the past 5 or 6 years is just health tech. Another kind of boring but massive industry with huge unmet need, but just looking at a lot of different applications. There's a lot of interesting applications for AI actually applied to health tech.
I mean, it's like you say, most often these kind of unsexy technologies are the ones that have the most impact on people's lives, whether it means that you can get a doctor's appointment or that you're able to participate in further higher education or something like that. So we shouldn't undersell it, really. I'd love to get your assessment of how much and how quickly you think that these things are changing. How much easier is it becoming for early stage companies to scale, and what do you think that it will take for us to get there? Do you think things are changing quickly, or do you think that it's more stable?
I think AI is changing things, and that companies are just able to hit revenue, hit scale a lot faster. But the issue is it's not always the most stable revenue. I'm not sure if you're seeing that as well, but it seems like there are a lot of enterprises that are experimenting with AI, or they're under pressure to try it, but it's a lot of pilots. It's unclear what the long-term commitment is to it, which I think is a little bit of why we're trying to be a bit cautious around AI.
Yeah, no, totally agree. And I think it takes time to see that repeatability and to see if those metrics are sort of scaling as we anticipate they will. And then to your question about speed, I mean, the other area that I'm particularly interested about is how the organizational design within the startups is scaling, and whether the use of AI can mean that you can reach that scale with less headcount and actually quicker. And that's where I think we're seeing a lot of really exciting momentum. But as you said, it will take time to really understand what is really replicable and what is really repeatable across a number of portfolio companies.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with that on the AI just helping teams just hire less people, hire less devs. I think one of the problems in Europe has been, even at pre-seed stage, a company raises 500K and they hire 12 people. And it just becomes, then you're spending all your time managing this team, and it's hard to find product market fit when you're in team meetings and trying to manage all these junior people. And so I think I see this ecosystem shifting a bit more to smaller teams, which I think is really, really positive. And of course, you can use AI to supplement a lot.
Yeah, and Klarna is just one example where they've done a lot of really cool stuff, and I think, the recent opinion of that from the company is that humans are irreplaceable and there always needs to be built around that, but in terms of efficiencies, whether it's around customer support or marketing or replacing more traditional software, I think there's a lot that we're still learning and we can really utilize to accelerate scale.
And smaller teams are often more agile. It's far easier to make decisions, so I guess that lends itself to scaling. In 5 years' time, would you say that in terms of getting those early pre-seed startups past the Series A mark, do you think that Europe will be competing with the US and Asia, or do you think that things are moving more slowly than that?
Yeah, I think we're definitely competing already. I don't know what you're finding, but I find that the best founders, there's always competitive rounds for the best founders without taking into consideration where they're based. And it doesn't even need to be in sort of some of the bigger capitals in Europe. I think we're seeing now that Eastern European founders can raise from really amazing global funds because the world is becoming a lot more global in that way. So I'm very much the believer that the great talent and the great founders are very much on the global scale from day one.
Yeah, I agree. I think Europe is definitely on the upswing. I'm really optimistic about the ecosystem. I think it's probably going to take more than 5 years, similar to self-driving cars. It's just going to take longer. But I think in the long run, Europe will get there. It has all the right structural things.
All the right ingredients. Okay, we're going to have to leave it there because we're quite tight on time. But I'm excited to announce that next up we'll have our startup stage where we'll be showcasing some of Europe's most exciting startups. So Maren, you'll be one of the judges for that competition. So we'll leave you to provide them with your feedback.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks.